The October wind carried the first hints of winter across the small town of Rapid City, South Dakota, as Sarah Mitchell locked up her classroom at Roosevelt High School. At 42, she had dedicated nearly 2 decades to teaching American literature, but tonight felt different. Her phone buzzed with a text from the school counselor. "Sarah, we have a situation. Ayanna Crowfeather needs emergency placement for a week. Her grandmother is hospitalized. Can you help?" Sarah stared at the message, her breath forming small clouds in the crisp air. She knew Ayanna, a quiet 16-year-old Lakota student who sat in the back of her third-period class, always listening intently but rarely speaking. The girl's essays revealed a sharp mind and deep connection to her heritage, but Sarah sensed something guarded about her, a wall built from experiences Sarah could only imagine. 20 minutes later, Sarah found herself at the Tribal Services office on the Pine Ridge Reservation, an hour's drive from town. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as she waited, the institutional smell of coffee and paperwork filling the small room. Through the window, she could see the vast expanse of prairie, golden under the setting sun. "Ms. Mitchell?" A tired-looking social worker appeared with a manila folder. "Thank you for coming. Ayanna's grandmother had a stroke yesterday. She'll be in the hospital for at least a week, maybe longer. Ayanna has no other immediate family available." When Ayanna emerged from a back room, she carried a worn duffel bag and avoided eye contact. Her long black hair fell like a curtain around her face, and she wore the same faded jeans and oversized hoodie Sarah had seen her in countless times at school. There was something heartbreaking about how small she looked in that moment. "Hi, Ayanna," Sarah said softly. "I know this isn't ideal, but you're welcome to stay with me as long as you need." The girl nodded silently, her dark eyes finally meeting Sarah's for just a moment before darting away again. The drive back to Rapid City was quiet except for the hum of the heater and the soft country music playing on the radio. Sarah lived alone in a modest 2-bedroom house on the outskirts of town, a simple place with a wraparound porch and a garden she tended with more hope than skill. As they pulled into the driveway, she noticed Ayanna studying the house carefully, as if memorizing every detail. "The guest room is yours," Sarah said as they walked inside. "There's a bathroom right next door, and please make yourself at home. Are you hungry?" Ayanna shook her head, clutching her bag tighter. "Thank you, Ms. Mitchell. I'll try not to be any trouble." The formality in her voice made Sarah's chest tighten. "You're not trouble, Ayanna. And you can call me Sarah when we're not at school." That first night, Sarah lay awake listening to the old house settle around them. Down the hall, she could hear Ayanna moving restlessly, and once she was certain she heard quiet crying. She wanted to knock on the door to offer comfort, but something told her the girl needed space to process everything on her own terms. The next morning brought the familiar routine of coffee and toast, but with the added complexity of navigating around each other in the small kitchen. Ayanna appeared dressed for school, her hair pulled back in a neat braid, her face composed but distant. "I made extra coffee," Sarah offered, gesturing to the pot. "I don't drink coffee," Ayanna replied politely. "But thank you." At school, their dynamic shifted back to teacher and student, but Sarah found herself watching Ayanna more closely. During lunch, she noticed the girl eating alone, reading a worn paperback book. When their eyes met across the cafeteria, Ayanna offered a small nod. Not quite a smile, but an acknowledgement of their new shared reality. By the third day, small cracks began to appear in Ayanna's carefully constructed walls. It started with a simple question about homework, asked over the dinner Sarah had prepared. Nothing fancy, just spaghetti and salad, but the girl had eaten with genuine appreciation. "Ms. Mitchell," Sarah Ayana corrected herself. Why did you agree to take me in? You don't really know me. Sarah set down her fork, considering her words carefully. I know you're a good student with a sharp mind. I know you write with wisdom that goes beyond your years. And I know that sometimes we all need someone to believe in us, especially when things get tough. Ayana was quiet for a long moment, twirling pasta around her fork. My grandmother always said that some people are put in our path for a reason. She would have liked you. Would have? Sarah's heart sank. She's not doing well. The doctors say it was a major stroke. Ayana's voice cracked slightly. She raised me after my parents died in a car accident when I was 8. She's all I have. Without thinking, Sarah reached across the table and gently touched Ayana's hand. The girl didn't pull away. You're not alone now. The weekend brought a different rhythm to their temporary arrangement. Saturday morning, Sarah was in her garden, pulling the last of the summer vegetables before the first hard frost, when she noticed Ayana watching from the kitchen window. A few minutes later, the girl appeared outside, wearing one of Sarah's old sweatshirts. My grandmother had a garden, Ayana said, kneeling beside Sarah in the dirt. She taught me about the 3 sisters, corn, beans, and squash. They grow better together than apart, Sarah smiled, handing her a pair of gloves. Show me. As they worked, Ayana began to open up about her life on the reservation, the beauty and the struggles, the rich traditions and the modern challenges. She spoke of powwows and traditional dances, of her grandmother's stories about their ancestors, of the way the prairie looked during different seasons. People at school sometimes look at me like I'm from another planet, Ayana admitted, carefully pulling weeds around the tomato plants. Like being Lakota is something exotic or primitive. But we're just people, you know? We have the same dreams and problems as everyone else. Sarah nodded, understanding more than Ayana might have expected. I grew up feeling different too, just in a different way. My parents divorced when I was young, and I was shuffled between relatives. I never felt like I truly belonged anywhere until I found my calling in teaching. That afternoon, while sorting through old photo albums Sarah had brought down from the attic, Ayana paused at a picture of Sarah's college graduation. You look so young, she said, with the first genuine smile Sarah had seen from her. I was terrified, Sarah laughed. I had no idea what I was doing. I still don't most days. But you help people anyway. We all help each other, Ayana. That's how the world works, at its best. Sunday evening brought news from the hospital. Ayana's grandmother was stable, but would need extensive rehabilitation. The 1-week arrangement would need to extend indefinitely. As Sarah hung up the phone, she found Ayana standing in the doorway, tears streaming down her face. I'm sorry, the girl whispered. I know this isn't what you signed up for. Sarah crossed the room and for the first time wrapped Ayana in a hug. The girl's shoulders shook as she finally let herself break down. Hey, Sarah said softly, we'll figure this out. Whatever happens, we'll figure it out together. November slipped into December with surprising ease. What had started as a temporary arrangement began to feel like something more permanent, though neither Sarah nor Ayana spoke about it directly. The house filled with new rhythms, Ayana's early morning prayers in Lakota, the sound of her beadwork late at night, the way she hummed traditional songs while doing homework at the kitchen table. The first major test came during Thanksgiving week. Sarah had planned a quiet dinner for 2, but Ayana seemed increasingly withdrawn as the holiday approached. In my culture, we give thanks every day, Ayana explained when Sarah asked about her mood. But this holiday, it's complicated for Native people. It represents the beginning of everything we lost. Sarah felt a pang of cultural blindness, realizing she had never considered the holiday from that perspective. Would you prefer we skip it? Or maybe create our own tradition. Ayana looked surprised that Sarah was willing to abandon her own customs. After a moment of thought, she said, "What if we did both? Acknowledge the pain, but also celebrate what we're grateful for right now." They spent Thanksgiving morning at the reservation, visiting Ayana's grandmother in the rehabilitation facility. The elderly woman was awake but still struggling with speech. When she saw Sarah, her eyes filled with something that might have been gratitude or recognition, or both. "Grandmother, this is Sarah," Ayana said in Lakota, then translated. "The teacher I told you about." The older woman reached out with her good hand, gripping Sarah's fingers with surprising strength. She spoke a few words in Lakota, and Ayana's eyes widened in surprise. "What did she say?" Sarah asked. Ayana hesitated, then smiled softly. She said, "You have a good heart, and that I should listen to it as well as my own." That afternoon, they returned to Sarah's house and prepared a fusion meal. Traditional turkey alongside Lakota fry bread and Three Sisters soup. As they cooked together, Ayana taught Sarah a few words in Lakota, laughing when Sarah's pronunciation made the words sound entirely different. "Your Lakota sounds like you have marbles in your mouth," Ayana teased, the first time Sarah had heard her genuinely joke around. "Well, your English pronunciation was perfect from day one, so I think you win," Sarah replied, hip-checking the girl playfully as they stood at the stove. The moment felt significant. Not just teacher and student, not just guardian and ward, but something approaching family. December brought the first real snow, and with it, a new challenge. College application deadlines were approaching, and Ayana's grades, while good, weren't quite scholarship level in all subjects. Sarah found herself staying up late, helping with essays and application forms, discovering that Ayana's dream was to study environmental science with a focus on sustainable agriculture. "I want to help my community," Ayana explained as they worked on her personal statement. "The reservation has so many challenges with food security and economic development, but I want to use traditional knowledge combined with modern science." Sarah was struck by the girl's maturity and vision. "You'll make an incredible difference," she said, meaning every word. One evening in mid-December, as they decorated Sarah's modest Christmas tree, Ayana grew quiet. "Sarah, can I ask you something personal?" "Of course." "Why didn't you ever have kids of your own? You'd be a great mom." The question caught Sarah off guard. She had wondered if Ayana would ever ask, knowing how observant the girl was. "I was married once. Briefly, in my 20s. We talked about children, but life took us in different directions. After the divorce, I focused on my career. I always thought there would be time later, but later has a way of becoming too late." Ayana nodded thoughtfully. "Maybe the universe was saving you for something else." That night, as Sarah listened to Ayana's gentle breathing down the hall, she wondered if the girl might be right. March arrived with the first tentative hints of warmth, carrying on its gentle breeze, the unmistakable promise of new beginnings, and the hope that comes with longer days and softer light. The harsh winter that had seemed to stretch endlessly was finally loosening its grip, revealing patches of earth that had been buried under snow for months. Ayana's grandmother had made truly remarkable progress in rehabilitation, her strength returning day by day with a determination that reminded everyone where Ayana had inherited her resilience. She was moving to assisted living, not quite ready to live independently again, but no longer in the critical condition that had once made the doctors exchange worried glances in hushed hospital corridors. The question that had been hovering unspoken between Sarah and Ayana for months, dancing around the edges of their daily conversations like a butterfly afraid to land, finally demanded attention with the urgency of spring itself. They were in the garden on a particularly beautiful afternoon, the sun warming their backs as they prepared beds for spring planting. Sarah's hands worked methodically through the dark, rich soil, while Ayana knelt beside her, both of them finding a peaceful rhythm in the familiar motions. The air smelled of earth and promise, with the faintest hint of green things stirring to life beneath the surface. It was in this moment of quiet contentment that Ayana brought up the conversation they both knew was inevitable. "The social worker called yesterday," she said, her voice carefully neutral as she didn't look up from the soil she was turning with practiced precision. Her dark hair fell forward, creating a curtain that partially hid her expression. "She wanted to discuss my living situation for the rest of the school year and beyond." Sarah's hands stilled completely on her gardening tools, her heart skipping a beat at the weight of those words. She could hear the careful control in Ayana's voice, the way she was trying to keep emotion at bay while broaching this most important of topics. "What did you tell her?" "That I needed to talk to you first." Ayana finally lifted her head and met Sarah's eyes, and in that gaze was a vulnerability that took Sarah's breath away. "Sarah, I need you to know that these have been the happiest months of my life since my parents died. Every morning I wake up in that beautiful room you prepared for me, and for a moment I forget that this isn't permanent. But I don't want to assume anything about what you want or need." The raw honesty in her voice, the courage it took to lay her heart so completely bare, made Sarah's throat tight with emotion. She set down her tools completely and turned to face this remarkable young woman who had somehow, without either of them quite realizing when it happened, become the center of her world. "Ayana, I need you to know that having you here has changed my life in ways I never expected and could never have imagined." Sarah's voice was thick with feeling as she spoke. "This house, which I've lived in for 15 years, feels like a home for the first time since I moved in. The silence that used to feel so oppressive is now filled with your laughter, your music, the sound of you moving through the rooms. You've brought light into corners that had been dark for so long I'd forgotten they existed." "But," Ayana sensed there was more, could read the hesitation in Sarah's expression despite the warmth of her words. "But I want to make sure we're both choosing this for the right reasons, not just because it's comfortable or convenient or because we're both afraid of change." Sarah's words came carefully, each one chosen with the deliberate care of someone who understood that words, once spoken, have the power to heal or hurt. "You're at such an important time in your life, and I don't want you to feel trapped by gratitude or obligation." They worked in contemplative silence for a while, the only sounds the soft scraping of tools against earth and the distant call of birds returning from their winter migrations. Both were processing the enormous weight of the conversation, understanding that what they decided here would shape not just the coming months, but potentially the rest of their lives. The spring air seemed to hold its breath around them, waiting. Finally, Ayana spoke again, her voice stronger now, filled with a certainty that hadn't been there before. "My grandmother is well enough now that I could go back to the reservation," she said, her words careful but unwavering, as if she had rehearsed them 1,000 times in her mind before finally allowing them to leave her lips. "There are families there who would take me in, good families who knew my parents and who would welcome me with open arms. They've always been there, part of my past, part of who I am. They would never turn me away." The words hit Sarah like a wave crashing against the shore. Her heart contracted, and she felt a sharp, almost physical pang at the thought of losing Ayana to the reservation, to a life so different from the one they had built together. Still, she nodded, struggling to keep her expression neutral, to hide the flood of emotions rising within her. She had to appear strong, even if her insides were anything but. "That's true," she said, her voice calm, though it trembled slightly with the weight of her own thoughts. And it would be a good choice, a smart choice. But Ayanna wasn't finished. She continued, her voice taking on a note of fierce conviction that only deepened the bond Sarah had come to feel for her. "But I don't want to," Ayanna said firmly, her chin lifting in that familiar, stubborn determination Sarah had come to love and admire. "Not because I'm running away from my culture or my community. I'll always be Lakota, and that will always be a fundamental part of who I am. That's not something that distance can change or that choosing a different path can diminish. My heritage is woven into me, into my very soul. I carry it with me wherever I go, no matter where I live or what I choose to do. That is something no place, no person can take from me. Not the reservation, not even time itself." Sarah's heart swelled with pride and admiration for the young woman before her, the young woman who spoke with such clarity, such maturity. But her own heart still ached, still clung to the fear of losing this beautiful, brilliant soul to a place Sarah could never fully understand. Still, she held herself together as best as she could, the weight of her own emotions buried beneath a practiced smile. "But," Ayanna continued, her voice unwavering, as though she was about to share something sacred, something deeply personal, "I don't want to go back because I've found something here, something I didn't even know I was missing until I had it. I found something that makes me feel whole, makes me feel like I belong in a way I never knew I could." Sarah listened intently, her heart catching in her throat, a delicate thread of hope sparking deep within her chest, even as she braced herself for what might come next. She had an inkling of what Ayanna was about to say, but she needed to hear it, needed to hear her say it aloud, just to make sure her heart wasn't deceiving her, to make sure she wasn't hoping for something that wasn't there. "What's that?" Sarah asked softly, her voice barely a whisper, though she was holding her breath as she waited for the answer. She had to ask, even though she thought she already knew, even though she hoped deep down that she was right, that what they had shared, what they were building together, was enough, more than enough. Ayanna's eyes met Sarah's then, and for a moment there was an unspoken understanding between them, a connection so strong that it seemed to transcend words. Ayanna smiled softly, her eyes warm with an emotion that Sarah could only describe as love, love in its purest, most unguarded form. And then, with a calm certainty, Ayanna spoke the words that made Sarah's heart skip a beat. "I've found a family here," Ayanna said simply, her voice steady and clear. "I've found you. I've found a place where I feel safe, where I feel cared for, where I feel like I matter. I've found a home I didn't know I was looking for, and I want to stay here, with you. Because here, I'm not just a visitor, I'm not just someone passing through, I'm part of something real, something that's mine." Tears welled up in Sarah's eyes at those words, but she held them back, unwilling to let her emotions take over. She could feel the weight of Ayanna's declaration, the promise of a future, the hope of a shared life together. And it was in that moment, as they stood there, the silence between them filled with so much unspoken love, that Sarah realized what she had always hoped for. Ayanna wasn't just a girl she had taken in, she was her family, and that was more than enough. Ayanna's smile when it came was radiant, transforming her entire face with a joy so pure and complete that it seemed to light up the garden around them. A mom. The words hung in the air between them, beautiful and terrifying and exactly right. They carried the weight of months of growing love, of small moments that had built into something larger than either of them had expected. Sarah set down her gardening tools completely and really looked at this remarkable young woman who had somehow become not just her responsibility, but her daughter in every way that mattered. "I've been thinking the same thing," Sarah admitted, Her voice barely above a whisper as tears she hadn't even realized were coming began to blur her vision. "Every single day for months, I've been thinking the same thing, but I wanted you to feel completely free to choose your own path, without any pressure from me or sense that you owed me anything." "I am choosing," Ayana said firmly, reaching across the small space between them to take Sarah's dirt-stained hands in her own. "I'm choosing you. I'm choosing us. I'm choosing this family we've built together, one ordinary day at a time." That evening, as the sun set in brilliant shades of orange and pink that painted the sky like a promise, they called the social worker together. They sat on the couch in the living room, Ayana's head on Sarah's shoulder, as they discussed the legal steps for Sarah to become Ayana's official guardian. The process would take months of paperwork and court appearances and home visits, but the emotional commitment was already complete, had been complete for longer than either of them had been ready to admit. 2 weeks later, on a Saturday morning that felt like the very first real day of spring, with the air soft and warm and filled with the sound of birds and the promise of growth everywhere, they were again in the garden. They were planning the layout for the vegetable plot they'd decided to expand this year. Ayana had requested space for the traditional Three Sisters planting of corn, beans and squash that her grandmother had taught her about, when a car pulled into the driveway. Ayana's grandmother emerged slowly from the passenger side, supported by a walker but moving under her own power with the careful dignity of someone who had fought hard to regain their independence. She was smaller than Sarah had expected, but there was an unmistakable strength in her bearing, a regal quality that spoke of a lifetime of overcoming challenges with grace. "Grandmother!" Ayana ran to embrace her, switching effortlessly to Lakota as she helped the older woman toward the garden, her voice filled with joy and reverence as she spoke in the language of her childhood. Sarah hung back slightly, watching nervously as the two most important people in Ayana's life came together in her space for the first time. What would Ayana's grandmother think of the choice her granddaughter was making? Would she see Sarah as someone who was trying to steal Ayana away from her heritage, her people, her true family? The questions swirled in Sarah's mind as she tried to read the older woman's expression. The elderly woman studied Sarah for a long, measuring moment, her dark eyes sharp and assessing despite her recent illness. When she finally spoke, it was in accented but perfectly clear English, each word chosen with care. "My granddaughter tells me you have given her both roots and wings, a place to grow strong, and the freedom to soar." Sarah felt tears prick her eyes at the unexpected blessing contained in those words. "She's given me far more than I've given her," she replied honestly. "She's taught me what it means to be a family." Ayana's grandmother smiled then, and in that smile, Sarah could see exactly where Ayana had inherited her warmth and her wisdom. That is how the very best families work. Not blood alone that makes family, but choice. Every single day we choose to love, to support, to believe in each other. We choose to show up, to stay, to care. That is the foundation of real family. As the three of them stood in the garden, surrounded by the promise of new growth and the gentle warmth of spring sunshine, Sarah understood with crystal clarity that some of life's most beautiful and profound transformations happen not through dramatic moments or grand gestures, but through the quiet accumulation of ordinary days filled with extraordinary love. Through shared meals and homework help and late-night conversations and the thousand small ways people care for each other. "Mom," Ayana said softly, testing the word as she helped her grandmother to a comfortable garden chair they'd brought outside for the occasion. "Can you teach grandmother how to make your famous chocolate chip cookies? She's been asking about them ever since I told her about them." Sarah's heart swelled with a joy so complete and overwhelming it took her breath away. The word "mom," spoken so naturally, so easily, as if it had always belonged to her, resonated deep within her soul, igniting a warmth she hadn't realized she'd been longing for. For a moment, everything else faded, and all she could hear was the sound of her own heartbeat echoing in the quiet space between them. She had waited for this moment, this simple, beautiful word, more than she ever could have imagined. It felt like the final piece of a puzzle she didn't even know was incomplete. "Of course, sweetheart, we have all the time in the world." Her voice, steady and filled with tenderness, held a truth that felt as permanent as the sky above them. She reached out, pulling her closer, and in that embrace, everything felt right. The past seemed distant, like a shadow fading into the background of a story that had already been written. The present was all that mattered, and the future stretched before them, wide and full of promise. The spring air, crisp and fresh, carried the scent of blooming flowers, mingling with the earthiness of new beginnings. The trees swayed gently in the breeze, as if nature itself was celebrating the moment, reminding her that with every season comes the chance for renewal. It was in this perfect moment, surrounded by the two people who had slowly and unexpectedly become her whole world, that Sarah understood something profound. Sarah realized that sometimes the family you choose chooses you back, and that's when real magic happens, not in grand gestures, but in quiet moments of connection. Love became a daily practice, a commitment renewed each day, found in the small moments, laughter, silences, and unspoken understanding that made life meaningful. As Sarah looked at her daughter and partner, she felt peace and didn't need to look back or forward. The family she had chosen, and who had chosen her, was everything she wanted. In that moment, she understood that true love isn't about finding perfect moments, but creating them together, with an ever-growing bond that supported and grounded her, reminding her of the magic of life.